Sometimes as I trawl through YouTube looking for ideas, I stumble across a video that makes me go, huh? And this is a prime example. It's a video that was uploaded in October, has already been watched nearly 500,000 times, and promises facts about Germans that don't get taught in school. It wasn't quite what I was expecting though. It mostly consists of a list of German-speaking communities all over the world, and of notable people with names of German origin. It is in fact an extract from an essay by Thomas Sowell, an economist and social theorist. The essay, published in his book Black Rednecks and White Liberals, argues that it is unfair to judge Germans purely on the very short period of history that was the Third Reich, and I absolutely go along with that. The problem is that it does so by effectively saying there exists a German diaspora, which I'm afraid is completely irrelevant. But what really made me go, huh? Was the very first sentence.
Germans are an old people. Their language is centuries older than English, French, Spanish, or Italian.
Really? I mean, I understand that Sowell isn't a linguist, but even so, didn't he fact-check his first fact? The misconception is that German came first and English split off from it when the Anglo-Saxons moved, logically, from Germany to England. For the benefit of all you non-linguists out there, no, that's not how it happened. I can show you a diagram with most of the Germanic languages spoken today, and yes, it is greatly simplified. The reality is a lot more complicated than this. But here's the point. English did not split off from German. Rather, both English and German split off from a common ancestor. Okay, that's easy. We just need to find out which language split off first, right? Well, no, it's not quite that simple for at least two reasons. First, we're going back to a time before there were audio recordings and when very few people could even write, so we don't have very much information to go on. And second, when does a new language start? This is a surprisingly difficult question to answer, partly because linguistically speaking, we can't even say what the difference is between a language and a dialect. And languages don't usually just suddenly come into existence. They slowly evolve. You, I hope, have no problems communicating with your parents, and yet you don't speak exactly the same way that they do. And your parents don't speak exactly the same way as your grandparents. And they don't speak exactly the same way as your great-grandparents. And so on. Each generation slightly changes the way the language is spoken. Now, these changes are very small, but over time they add up. If you can understand me, you can certainly understand a book by Charles Dickens, who was writing in the 19th century, but his English will seem quite old-fashioned. William Shakespeare was 16th century, and his English is perfectly clear, but starting to get a little bit difficult in some places. Geoffrey Chaucer is 14th century, and his English is still very clearly English, but by now you probably need the help of an expert to understand it completely. Now take a look at this. Believe it or not, this is English, as it was being spoken, or rather written, sometime just before the beginning of the 11th century. It's the first few lines of the epic poem Beowulf. The people who spoke this language called it English, but can we really say that it's the same language as the English that I'm speaking now? Well, there's no point in time when that English just suddenly stopped. It just gradually changed from generation to generation. And if we continue to go back in time, we can trace the language back and see how it evolved from earlier languages that were, well, not English. But there was no definite point at which one language stopped and the next language began. It was all one slow process from generation to generation. And the same is true of German. If we take a look at the Hildebrandslied, a poem written about the same time as Beowulf, Well, the first couple of words seem familiar, but after that, just like Beowulf, it's barely recognizable as the same language. What actually happened was this. At the time the Roman Empire collapsed, the people living in Central Europe were speaking a collection of very closely related West Germanic language varieties. Some of these people migrated to the British Isles, and the languages they spoke evolved into modern English and Scots. The languages still being spoken on the continent evolved into modern German and Dutch. The languages naturally split in this way because they were now divided by the North Sea. But it's not really true to say that English absorbed other languages while German remained pure. Both languages were affected by other languages around them, but in different ways. So, can we say when English started and when German started? Well, kind of. In reality, there are no definite boundaries, but we can agree on where it would be useful to draw boundaries. For English, this is easy. We can say that English began when Anglo-Saxons migrated to England, which would be about the 5th century. For German, linguists usually point to the High German consonant shift. What is a consonant shift? Well, let me explain. It sometimes happens that in a relatively short period of time, by which I mean only 2 or 3 centuries maybe, a language undergoes a sound shift. That is when the sounds quite literally change. Some years ago, Tom Scott made a video about a sound shift that is happening right now in British English and explains why he doesn't pronounce his R's the same way that I pronounce mine. Although there are more ways of pronouncing it than he said, and mine isn't one of the ones that he mentioned. Now again, in a single lifetime the changes are very small, but over hundreds of years they can add up to something big. The High German consonant shift is one such big thing and resulted in the High German language varieties splitting off from the other West Germanic languages. For example, we have the English word ship and the Dutch word ship and the Low German word ship. But in High German, which gives us the standard German spoken today, the final consonant shifted and we now have Schiff. And what is Low German? Well, it's a variety of German that is actually closer to Dutch than it is to modern standard German, and you can still hear it being spoken in parts of northern Germany. It wasn't affected by the High German consonant shift, but anyway, this is way beyond the scope of this video. And similarly, we have English sleep, but High German Schlaf. And other consonants were affected as well, so we have English water, but High German Wasser, or English thorn, but High German Dorn. This is the event that is considered to be the birth of the German language. I say event, it actually happened in 4 phases, beginning around the 4th century and continuing into the 10th century. But for a more precise definition, linguists have mostly agreed that a sensible date is about the 7th century, which unfortunately for Thomas Sowell means that English is about 200 years older than German. But as I hope I've been able to demonstrate, these are completely arbitrary labels which we use only for convenience. In reality, it is not possible to say exactly when a language began. Except for conlangs, of course. Conlangs are deliberately invented languages like Klingon or Esperanto. Conlangs have definite beginnings, most languages don't. By the way, some of you have accused me of using the famous Merkel rhombus. This is not a Merkel rhombus. This is the Merkel rhombus. This, actually, I don't know what this is.